Welcome to Kabil Kids. Today we will see tactical themes like discover check, discover attack, and double check. So let's start with discover check. A discover check is simple when you move a piece and some other piece is behind it and is giving a check to the king. And that way we can gain advantage. For example, this position. As you can see, the rook is close to the king, and when we take the rook, the king has no option but to take it back. And now we will notice that the bishop and the king both are in the same diagonal, and the only thing stopping it is a pawn. So now we can safely push the pawn, and it's a check with the bishop, and the king has to react to it, and he has no time to save the rook. Maximum he can do to play the rook in between, but if he plays that, we will just simply take, and the king has to move, and we will win the game. So let's see an example of another discovered check. So this is a very typical position. It comes in many games. In this case, as you can see, the bishop and the queen are in the same file as that of the king. And the king has nowhere to go. If we move the bishop somewhere, then the king can go to g8. And if we give a check with the support of the bishop, then the king can run to f7. So to stop that, we can play bishop g6 check. So what we are doing here is we are giving a check with the queen, and the king has to move, but the king doesn't have this escape square of f7. So it's a check and king has to move. So king g8, and now we play queen h7, and it's checkmate because the king has nowhere to go. Now let's see example of discovered attack. In this case, there's a discovered attack which may be a little difficult to find, but we have to remember the tactical theme that if there's a knight on g5 and a queen is placed here, then queen h7 will be a checkmate. And also, we have to notice that this bishop on b7 is not protected. That is why we can play this awesome move, knight g5. The idea is simple. We are threatening a checkmate, and at the same time, we are threatening the bishop. He has no option, black has no option but to capture the knight to avoid the checkmate. And once he does that, we take the bishop on b7 and we get our piece back, but at the same time we are attacking the rook as well. So if he develops his knight, we take his rook and we are an exchange up. So let's see another example of discover attack. In this case, as you can see, the queen is hanging, and it's a similar thing to the previous puzzle because we have to create a checkmate net. So to do that, we can see that the rook is already controlling this file, and if somehow we can get our rook to h8, then it will be checkmate, just in case the rook is protected by some other piece. And that is why we can play a move like knight g6 here. The idea is simple. We are threatening checkmate with the rook and also attacking the queen. If the queen moves somewhere, we can simply checkmate the king. If he takes our knight, we take the queen, and the best option maybe he has to take our rook, but in that case we take with our knight, and we are safely 2 pawns up, out of which one is a pass pawn, so it won't be very difficult to win this game. Let's see another example in which discovered attack and discovered check both are used. As you can see, the bishop, rook, pawn and king are on the same diagonal. That is why we can afford to play a move like c5. The idea is that we are attacking the bishop on b6 and we have opened our bishop on b3 on this deadly diagonal. Opponent has no option but to capture the pawn, and now we can give a check, a discovered check, queen rook g5, which is attacking the queen. So the black king has to react to it, and if he moves, then we can simply take the queen. Maximum he can bring his queen in between, but in that case he will just take the queen and win the game. Now let's see examples of double check. This is the first example, and a double check is a check in which two pieces are giving a check to the king, and that means that the only option the opponent has is to move his king. He cannot block the check, and obviously he cannot capture the pieces because there are two pieces that are giving the check. So in this case, as you can see, the rook, bishop and king are on the same file. So we know that it's a double check, so let's find a double check. And the only double check I can see is bishop d6. It's attacking the king, and a rook is also attacking the king, and it's definitely a double check, and the king only has one square, which is e8, after which we can checkmate the black king. Let's see how. So first we play bishop d6 check, and both the pieces are giving a check, so black has no option but to move his king, and he has no place but to move his king to e8. And now this is a typical mating pattern. We will put our rook on f8, and with the support of the bishop, the king is checkmated because he cannot run away as his own bishop on d7 is coming in its way. Let's see another example of double check. In this case also we can see that queen, knight and the king are on the same diagonal. And as we know this is a double check, we can find the double check easily. But we also have to notice that this knight here is very powerful as it is controlling these two squares. So we can play here knight d6 check, and the point is that the king cannot go to e7 because the knight is controlling that square, and also the queen is giving a check and knight is also giving a check, so it's a double check. So black has no option but to move his king, and when he does that we can safely give a checkmate because the king cannot go here because of the knight, and queen cannot be taken because the knight is supporting the queen. Let's see a last example of a double check and a discovered check. So in this case it looks a little complicated, but as you can see the bishop, rook and king are on the same diagonal, and this bishop is also helping us. That is why we can play an incredible move, which is rook b7 check. It's a double check because the bishop is also giving a check and the rook is also giving a check, and at the same time it's a discovered check. The king cannot take the rook because it is supported by the bishop. The only option the king has is to move to a8, and when he does that we can sure take his queen with a discovered check with the bishop, but we have even better move, which is rook b8 checkmate, because it's a discovered check, it's a double check with the rook and the bishop, and the king cannot take the rook because our dark square bishop is protecting that rook. I hope you found the content insightful. Visit our website www.kabilkids.com or contact us at info@kabilkids.com. Please like, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you and stay tuned for the next exciting video.